It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Anyone can bake bread, but it takes something special to rock it. This is David Harrison of the Locked On Commanders podcast. This episode is brought to you by Dave's Killer Bread, champions of killer taste, killer texture, along with killer nutrition. Dave's Killer Bread is the organic bread you can eat on its own if you want to. Add your favorite sandwich fixings, and you've got yourself an elevated eating experience that you won't find anywhere else. So make sure you visit daveskillerbread.com to learn more and do what my family and I do. Look for Dave's Killer Bread in the bread aisle of your local grocery store. That's Dave's Killer Bread, bread amplified.
Ooh, baby. It's a special one today on your source for fantasy hockey, the Thursday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Big time special returning guest and all of the NHL news covered for y'all that's affecting your team. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's tap in.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for joining us for the Thursday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, and thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode, big time returning guest, special friend of the show, Josh Wegman, fantasy guru of theScore. He's here to cover all of the latest news that's affecting your fantasy squad. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Josh, thank you so much for joining us, my friend. We got to keep it tight. And I know you're a busy guy, but there is a lot going on in the NHL. And, first of all, how are you doing? How are things? Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm great, guys. Really appreciate you having me on.
As always, brother, good to see you. And look, let's start with Carter Hart, because not only is there a lot of speculation out there, we're not going to talk about the off-ice issues. He's taking an indefinite leave, and this is going to leave a hole in the Flyers' crease. And this is a Flyers team that, last I checked, second in that Metro division, unsure how. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the hole he will leave and the opportunity for a young Swedish goalie in Samuel Ersson.
Yeah, I mean, Ersson will probably be the guy moving forward. I know they have Cal Peterson up too, and he's been around a while, but Peterson hasn't played well in the AHL this year, so I would expect Ersson to get the lion's share of the workload, so he would be the guy to own in fantasy. Flyers have been pretty good defensively this year too.
That was really going to be my question follow-up, not to cut you off. I'm fired up to have you on, so that's my bad. What have you seen from the Flyers? You mentioned the defensive end. They are a pesky team to play against, and maybe taking on, embodying a little bit of their coach in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tortorella gets a lot of flack, especially, being an analyst the previous few years before last season. Has some takes, he's anti-Michigan. Not the state, the move, the lacrosse move, just to be clear. But you know what? When it comes down to it, he's a great defensive coach. He's an excellent motivator. His teams are always really stingy defensively, and that's usually a good environment for a fantasy goalie.
Yeah, I've let my feelings towards John Tortorella, very well known about how I feel about him. But he is a great coach, and he's doing great things for the Philadelphia Flyers. And I really like Samuel Ersson in this situation. Flip and I have talked at length about his value and what he's done so far for the Philadelphia Flyers this season. He's played just as many games or close to as many games as Carter Hart has, 12-7-3 record, a .905 save percentage, a .244 goals against average. And we were talking about this the other day because I actually traded for Carter Hart at the beginning of the season in our fantasy league. And I think this is a good time right now for Ersson to get the crease and really show his worth and value for both the Philadelphia Flyers, but also other NHL teams, because he's only 24 years old. And we know there's a lot of hot commodity out for good goaltenders, and Samuel Ersson's doing so right now. I actually went to go pick him up in our competitive league, but guess who's got him secured right now? Big Flip over there. So might have to send you a trade later today, because I'm going to be absolutely depleted without any goaltenders on the market right now.
Well, like that segue there, and I'll throw it right back to you and to Josh. You mentioning trades, Jake Guentzel, Logan Couture. Unsure if either guys actually get moved, Josh. I know both Steele and I have had our eyes on both Guentzel and Logan Couture. Let's start with Guentzel. Steele, what's your take there? What's your question for Josh? Because I know those Vancouver Canucks are sniffing. I just don't know if Kyle Dubas knows what he wants to do with that roster just yet.
Yeah, it's a tough decision for Kyle Dubas because obviously he came in with big expectations for what this Penguins club could do. And obviously you've talked about it at length as well about the short window for a lot of these older players, especially Crosby, Malkin, and Chris Letang, about how much longer do they have to actually make a Stanley Cup run and these other pieces. And Jake Guentzel is one of those other pieces who's been elite over the last 6 years. He's pretty much been a point per game player besides the first 2 seasons in the NHL. And I could easily, he took a little bit of a underpayment on his last contract. I believe he's only getting paid $6 million. He's on the last year. He becomes a UFA. I could easily see him getting $10 million on his next contract, whether it's from the Penguins or whether it's from a different team in the NHL. But, for Josh and both you, Flip, I want to know how likely it will be if Jake Guentzel's actually going to be moved at the deadline, because I know the Vancouver Canucks have been inquiring about his availability and some other teams as well. But what's the likelihood that a player of Jake Guentzel's stature and skill actually gets moved from a club that is only 4 points out of a playoff spot right now?
Yeah, I would expect Kyle Dubas to take this right down to the wire, and maybe if Pittsburgh can get a bit hot right before the deadline, he'll keep him and give that team a chance, and there's still a chance you could re-sign him. So I don't think this is the type of player that will get moved well ahead of the deadline. I think if it's going to happen, it's going to be right on deadline day when Dubas can sort of...
A couple minutes right before.
Yeah, probably. I mean, just take as much time as you can to really see where your team is going. And if you have a chance at the playoffs, I think he'll probably try and ride it through, because I think a guy like Sidney Crosby is sort of owed that if you're in the thick of the playoff race. So if I were a betting man, I would bet that he remains a Pittsburgh Penguin the rest of the year, but obviously anything could happen. And I mean, from a fantasy perspective, I think staying in Pittsburgh is probably the best for his fantasy value. I mean, he's a guy that's probably going to produce anywhere he plays, but that top line real estate with Crosby and that built-in chemistry with Crosby would be tough to replicate anywhere else, even on a high-powered team like Vancouver.
Can't deny that. And that's the main point I would look at with this team is I'm not going to put it past Sidney Crosby that he goes on a little bit of a heater, even more than what he's doing. I know it's he's already had an excellent season. This guy's in the conversation for the Hart, and it's a very legitimate one. So you mentioned not being able to count out the team, and it's basically because of 87 at this point. I think they only have 13 or 14 skaters under contract headed into next season. I know Cap Friendly's your boy, Wegman, so I got to give a little shout out to Cap Friendly. Jeff Carter, a couple of those contracts coming off the books. They're going to have a little bit more money, but not much. Yeah. So Kyle Dubas, either way you slice it, is going to have to get creative here. Erik Karlsson coming in, it's exciting. It's a big name. After the triple-digit point season he had, obviously we were excited, but that puts them right up there against the cap. We're going to be right up there against the clock if we don't get to a few more topics on today's episode, including Logan Couture and some trade value there. This is one of Steele's favorite players. And I got a question for Josh about the top 4 teams in the NHL and who he thinks is best suited to go on a run, or perhaps maybe there's someone else on Josh's radar. He'll be around for a little bit longer. Big time bets at the end of the episode. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Much to the chagrin of Buffalo Bills fans, the playoffs rolls on, and if FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, no better time to get in on the NFL playoff action. New customers right now get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 wager. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use and so many different ways to wager. Live same-game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay over the Parlay Hub, and a whole lot more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a touchdown. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Anyone can bake bread, but it takes something special to rock it. This is David Harrison of the Locked On Commanders podcast. This episode is brought to you by Dave's Killer Bread, champions of killer taste, killer texture, along with killer nutrition. Dave's Killer Bread is the organic bread you can eat on its own if you want to. Add your favorite sandwich fixings, and you've got yourself an elevated eating experience that you won't find anywhere else. So make sure you visit daveskillerbread.com to learn more and do what my family and I do. Look for Dave's Killer Bread in the bread aisle of your local grocery store. That's Dave's Killer Bread, bread amplified.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you go to YouTube, check out Locked On Sports today. They've launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's been up for over a month and a half now. They're here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering every single league. So make sure you go over there and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I and special guest Josh Wegman. Thank you so much again for coming on here as many times as we've had you on, because we really do appreciate it, getting the insight and being able to have this dialogue with the three of us here. But I want to move forward with another trade potentially, and someone that's on the block. And it could be moved. I think could be moved because of what's going on in San Jose. Is Logan Couture rostered at 40% right now on Yahoo Sports. He's only been back. He did come back from injury. He has played 3 games. And the 3 games he's played, look at that. The Sharks have won 3 in a row. Absolutely spectacular from Logan Couture. He's got 1 assist, 2 shots, 5 blocks, and 6 hits. For me personally, I think he's a force to be reckoned with. Even at 34 years old, he has a lot of fantasy value. But he needs to be playing on a winning team. And obviously with the cap hit at $8 million for 3 more years, I do think he'll be traded at the trade deadline, because San Jose is still going through this rebuild. If he were traded, where would you like him to be traded to? And again, what do you think his fantasy value is moving forward at 34 years old?
I think the best fit for him would be Boston.
Yes.
Just because they have those holes down the middle. Pavel Zacha and Geeky and Patra. It's not the best crew there after Bergeron and Krejci left. So I think Boston would just be the perfect fit. Couture is that kind of savvy 2-way player too, who I think would be a seamless fit. And I know we're talking about Couture, but I think Elias Lindholm, you can make the same case that that's an ideal fit as well for him in Boston. Course. So Couture's got some terms, so I hope for Couture's sake, he gets to go chase a cup, because, he's been such a great player in the league for such a long time and hasn't won one. So, Boston would be by far, I think, the top location. I mean, maybe Winnipeg too. They could use a second line center, or even Colorado. They could also use a second line center. But in Boston, he could possibly get that top line real estate with Pasternak and maybe Marchand, or at least he'd play with one of the two, I would imagine.
It's a very, very interesting take, Steele. I think like you got something to say. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I was just going to say I have Boston Bruins at the top of my list, but I also have the Washington Capitals and Nashville Predators as 2 teams to maybe keep an eye on to potentially go after Logan Couture. I know Washington definitely needs some center depth. I know he's a little bit older, and Washington's an older team right now, but I think he can bring great things to the down the middle for the Washington Capitals and both the Nashville Predators.
Good Guelph, Ontario boy. Shout out G-Town. Just got to also put it on the map that I feel Logan Couture is one of those players that, and it's a bit of an intangible, but given his knack to have those kinds of games where he's like a wrecking ball, he sometimes has 3 or 4 points, 8 penalty minutes. He fills out the peripherals.
Yeah.
I can remember in a number of my leagues, you look up at the top and somehow one of the winners always has Logan Couture. So it doesn't surprise me that it's only winners and cup threats that are realistically good landing spots for him. And in my opinion, all of those that you mentioned, Josh, and, other than Nashville and Washington in terms of like actual playoff threats, Colorado, Boston, those make a whole ton of sense for me. And his fantasy value has to go right up. He's one of those perfect ads down the stretch, week to week. But speaking of cup threats, Mr. Josh Wegman, by the way, make sure you're checking out Josh's work on the Score app, over on Twitter, X, Josh Wegman _. It's a weird one. Just make sure you're searching up Josh Wegman. You'll find him. Question for you, my friend. The top 4 teams currently in the NHL, and you don't have to stick to just those 4. This isn't that serious. Boston Bruins right now, New York Rangers, Colorado Avalanche are right there behind the Winnipeg Jets and the Vancouver Canucks. if you are a betting man, which I don't think you are as much as me and Steele, perhaps, which is fine, which team do you think of those four, or maybe there's another that you're looking at, is best suited to go on a run in your opinion?
Okay, I'm going off the board. You said that's all right.
Yes.
The Edmonton Oilers are my pick.
Wow.
They are just
Here we go.
Scorching hot right now. They've won 14 in a row. They were also my preseason Stanley Cup pick, and I did make a futures bet on them to win the Cup.
Yes, John.
So I am very happy that they climbed out of that early season hole. It was kind of only a matter of time. You know, they were PDO was super low. They couldn't buy a save. They couldn't score a goal, but everything sort of evened out a bit, and now they're on just this red-hot streak. And part of the reason why I really liked Edmonton going into this year is because this is the final year of Ken Holland's contract as GM. And, you know, there's been some rumors that maybe he'll either step aside and become like a senior advisor after this year, or maybe just retire as a whole. There's been some talks of that. So I really think this is the deadline he could really go all in. I can see them totally replacing Cody Ceci on that top pair. That's probably their biggest hole. And if they could maybe get a guy like Tanev, maybe add a little bit of forward depth too. I think they're the team to beat. I think, this could be the year for McDavid, Draisaitl and company.
What's your take on that, Steele?
Yeah, I think if we're going off the board, Edmonton Oilers have to be the team. But if we're staying on the board, I think the Vancouver Canucks could be a real dark horse to make a push this playoff season, especially if Thatcher Demko continues playing the way that he is. He's been absolutely spectacular. But you know me, Flip. I'm going with the New York Rangers in this one. I've been on them for the last 2 seasons. Very disappointed last year when they lost the New Jersey Devils in that fashion. I just think at this point, again, I talked about the backup goaltender situation. I love Jonathan Quick as the backup goaltender. You obviously have Igor Shesterkin, Adam Fox, and Keandre Miller and Jacob Trouba on the blue line. They've got the bodies. They've got the grit, the physicality. I really hope come playoff time, Artemi Panarin doesn't fade like he has in the past in postseason. The same goes for Mika Zibanejad. I need to see a little bit more out of him offensively, scoring goals, because he has that touch. But I really like the New York Rangers. I love what they're doing this year, and I've been on them the last 2 seasons. I'm hoping that this is finally the year that they get all the way to the playoff, the Stanley Cup Finals.
Before I allow Josh to break down that take and the one that I have, because I'm going to go off the board a little bit as well, and that's not because I love throwing shade at the Boston Bruins, which perennially I do, and it doesn't work out for me. So here we go once again. Some voodoo pact with the devil. The Bruins are in first once again. Anyway, I'm looking at this Dallas Stars team as one is not going to be reckoned with in the playoffs. You do not want to go up against Jake Guentzel in this club. And I don't know what the prognosis is on Miro Heiskanen. Josh, maybe you know a little bit more than I do.
He should be back before All-Star break.
So there you go. The fact that Jake Guentzel and Miro Heiskanen have both been injured, they got their injuries out of the way early, a little extra rest on the bods, but more seriously, this forward lineup, in my opinion, is one of the most balanced and talented in the entire NHL. They get Miro Heiskanen back, one of my favorite blue liners in the game, along with Jake Guentzel. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid with this Dallas Stars team, and if you haven't paid attention, they're 2 points back of the Winnipeg Jets and closing. So that would be my pick. What's your take on those two things right there, Josh?
I love both those picks as well. I think both those teams are both legit Stanley Cup contenders. Going back to the Rangers, I think Peter Laviolette's just a fantastic coach. And if you look at his resume, every team he coaches, he brings to a cup final within his first few years on the job. He brought Philly to a cup. He won one with Carolina. He brought the Predators to a cup final. So I think that could definitely be in the cards in New York. And Dallas, like you said, I mean, that forward group is so balanced. They're having a really good season, even though Ottinger hasn't even played that well. So he's a guy that could definitely just turn it on at any time and carry his team through a series. With Dallas, I do think they probably need one more legit top 4 defenseman. Yeah. I think they would be a really fun fit for Noah Hannafin.
Ooh, I'd like that.
And Dallas is a pretty good place to play. The money situation and tax situation is pretty good. So I can maybe see them.
Good barbecue, I've heard as well.
Yeah, the old sign and trade. I could definitely see something like that happening with Dallas. Then you have, Harley and Hannafin and Heiskanen for the carrying your decor for the next 10 years or so.
Bang. Love it. Steele, this is why we have Josh on. Hot takes. good background information and snack reviews. Anyway, like I said, make sure you're checking Josh out on the theScore app. Always bring in that fire, Josh. Huge shout out to you for joining us. We're going to get to big time bets right after the break. Steele, take us there, brother.
Taking us there indeed. This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? If you're building a roster to win a league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. The thing I love most about Indeed is the Instant Match. Indeed does all the hard work for you. Sponsor a job and boom, Instant Match shows you candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your job description immediately after you post. With Instant Match, you can start hiring fast. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon, Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Attention hockey fans looking for NHL news and analysis? Look no further than the Locked On NHL podcast, offering daily insights on all the top NHL stories. From trade deadline and free agency rumors, teams on the rise, and discussion on the league's biggest stars. Locked On NHL has you covered for 30 minutes, 5 days a week. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe, the follow button, and leave a 5-star review. We appreciate all that love and support you show us every single day, Monday through Friday. 7 o'clock in the morning is when you can find all of our episodes. Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. We're going to have you on here more regularly because this was just a great conversation. Flip, do we have anything more to ask him? Do we want to continue the conversation of top 4 teams, or maybe one last question?
I just got one thing to get off the chest. Since Josh and I used to spend a lot of times in the old war room yelling at the TV, we are Leafs fans after all. We are unbiased Leafs fans. We try to be. I need your general take. We have a couple of extra minutes here before you got to run. Let's keep it short and tight. I watched an interview with Kevin Cheveldayoff the other day, and he was talking about his Winnipeg Jets having to play a very specific type of game for them to be successful. They know their identity, and they have to play a disciplined type of hockey every single night, or else they won't win. And so right now, they're playing their brand of hockey, and they know their identity. I thought about this from a Toronto Maple Leafs perspective, Josh. I can't put my finger on what the identity of this team is. And we watch a lot of Toronto hockey and read into it, and you are working the beat professionally. What is this team's identity? And if you could put your finger on it, we all know the blue line is a problem. Can Sheldon Keefe turn this around? And what are you doing to turn this around if you're running this team?
Yeah, I mean, my hopes are pretty low for this season. I wrote a column recently that they shouldn't really be players in the rental market at the deadline. I just don't think they have the team, and they've given up so many picks and stuff in the past. I think it's probably a good year to just ride the team you have, and unless you're making an ad with a guy who's signed longer term, or you can get signed to an extension. Because they don't have much of an identity. I mean, they're a high-powered offensive team, but they've been just way too leaky defensively all year. The goaltending, there's some question marks there as well. I mean, team doesn't have some goaltending question marks? There's like 5 or 6 that don't. But yeah, the defense is a major issue, and I don't think they're just one piece away from getting it fixed. So I think that'll be something that'll need to be overhauled in the offseason. So I don't really think this is the year, but I still think you could definitely win a cup with this core if the right pieces are added around them and the blue line gets fixed.
Hey, at least we got the Bills, right, boys? At least we have the Bills. Hey, baseball season is about to start. Guys, pitchers and catchers got to be reporting soon, Josh. Come on.
Would be nice if the Jays did something then. That's a whole other can of worms.
Let's keep it positive. Much love for joining us, my friend. We'll wrap up the show in a minute with big time bets, but shout out to Josh. Make sure you're checking him out on Twitter. Thanks again for joining us, brother. We'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it.
And we're back to finish off with, of course, big time bets, where the money is made. Many games on for Thursday night. Flip. It's got a same game parlay. We're going to get to that very, very shortly, but I got 3 picks coming from separate games. So if you don't mind, I'll just rattle them off real quickly, or I'll try to rattle them off quickly as best as I can. First pick, Red Wings on the money line against the Philadelphia Flyers. The Red Wings are at home. In the head-to-head, the Red Wings haven't matched up against the Flyers well in their last 10. They're 4-6-0. But in the last 10 regular season games this season, Red Wings are red hot. They're 7-2-1, while the Flyers have lost 3 straight. And as we were just talking about Samuel Erston, and I love the value that he has, I think this is still going to be a close game. But Alex Lyon's been red hot as well. So I'm going with the Red Wings on the money line at home against the Flyers. Second pick, Patrick Waugh is behind the bench of the New York Islanders. They're playing the Montreal Canadiens. You know he's going to want a big dub here. The Islanders still trying to figure it out. This is only his second or third game behind the bench.
This will be 3.
Third game behind the bench in their last 10 between the head-to-head matchup. They are 4-4-2, so very tight between these two teams. But the Canadiens also on a 3-game slide in the wrong direction right now.
I love that pick, Steele. Nice pick.
I'm going Islanders on the money line for my second pick and my lock of the night. I swear to God, if this doesn't hit, I'm going to absolutely lose my mind. Oilers puck line against the Chicago Blackhawks. They're on a 14-game win streak. 9 out of those 14 games, they've won by 2 or more goals. One of the wins where they only won by 1, it was an overtime, was against Chicago Blackhawks, but they're feeling themselves. McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Nurse, Nugent Hopkins, and more, and Skinner playing absolutely spectacular. So that's my lock of the night, Oilers puck line against the Blackhawks.
Hey, look, if you're going to get burned, why not get burned by the Edmonton Oilers going up against the Chicago Blackhawks? Because they'll tell you what, if you have the cojones to be laying some kind of major dollars on the other side of that puck, good for you, because I wouldn't be putting any money on the Chicago Blackhawks for the rest of the season that wasn't more than 2 or 3 pesos, because that's how bad that team is. I talked about that on yesterday's episode. That blue line is embarrassing. Seth Jones is there, and they have the young kid. I forget who it is. Korchinski? They have a young
Korchinski. I think they have Vlasic as well, who's been all right.
Yeah, Korchinski isn't too bad, but the forward group, that's a bad AHL team. No disrespect to Nicky Foligno, Jason Dickinson, and others. Those are all 4th line, 3rd line players, and they're playing top line minutes anyway. Same game parlay, baby. We used to call it a big flip, triple dip. I will spit this out. But I got to be taking a look at this Anaheim Ducks into the Dallas Stars. I'm going to figure it out, Steele. I was talking about that Dallas Stars team, and I'm being for real about it. And I looked up those odds just a minute ago. Right after the Edmonton Oilers at plus 900 and the Panthers at plus 950 is the Dallas Stars at plus 1,000. And guess what? They just got a 20 of my money for fun. That contradicts my preseason Oilers pick as well, but that's what happens when you're a degenerate gambler. So giddy up. Here we go. Same game parlay. Dallas on the puck line. I'm going all in on this one, Steele, because they have wins in 8 of their last 9 against the Anaheim Ducks. And let me put that with the under 6.5. 8 of the last 9 between these two teams, under the number. Jake Guentzel is back. I know it's been a rough ride for him this year, but I think the rest, I know it was an injury, but it's still rest. He's back. I think this is the perfect little reset at the midpoint of the season. I think Jake Guentzel is going to go off. You've heard me talk about him. He's one of my favorite goalies, but I think he's going to start to back it up in a big, big way. Going with the under and RoboCop. Anytime point. He scored a stunner the other night against the Islanders. He's on fire right now. He's got 6 points in his last 4 games. Give me Jason Robertson. Anytime point. Good Niagara Ice Dog. Shout out South Niagara. That's the parlay, Steele. Puck line, Dallas, minus 120. RoboCop, anytime point. And give me the under 6.5 as well. I'm feeling that one big time.
Always got to give a shout out to the good Niagara Ice Dogs and Niagara natives out there. They're getting it done. And Jason Robertson, I need him to keep going as well. He's on my keeper fantasy team. So I love what I'm seeing from Robertson right now. I love the same game parlay against these Ducks. I love the trend as well. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you go to YouTube. Locked On Sports Today has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's been up for over a month and a half now. They're here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering every single league. So make sure you tune in. Go to subscribe to the Locked On Sports Today YouTube channel.
We're struggling today, Steele.
We're struggling to get. Hey, I'm still a little bit sick. I'm trying to get these words out right now.
We'll let it go.
The first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I and special guest Josh Wegman. Make sure you have a great day out there. Good luck with all your bets, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.
JamesAllen.com is the online destination to easily design a customized engagement ring and save up to 50% compared to traditional stores. You pick a diamond, whether it's lab-created or earth-created. James Allen has over 200,000 conflict-free stones. Then you pick your ring setting and metal. And if you need some help, they have real-time diamond consultations available, where an expert can walk you through it all. Get 25% off your order at JamesAllen.com, code LOCKEDON. That's JamesAllen.com, code LOCKEDON.
Hey, Prime members, you can listen to this Locked On podcast ad-free on Amazon Music. Download the Amazon Music app today.